Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak on Nabi Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Welcome, brothers and sisters, to another installment of Zakat lessons. This will be installment number 4, and we will be discussing, inshallah ta'ala, how can I determine if I'm required to pay as zakat? How can I determine if I'm required to pay as zakat? I want to begin with a little bit of a disclaimer. I just had coffee so I could stay awake throughout the night, inshallah ta'ala. So I'm a little amped up. And so if I begin tripping over my words, I want to apologize in advance. I think because I'm a little excited because of the coffee, my mind may go faster than my tongue can go. And so if I trip over my words, I apologize in advance. I'm going to try not to do that because this is a very important topic. But just wanted to give that disclaimer, inshallah ta'ala. So there are 2 prerequisites for the obligation of a zakat on gold, silver, and currency, which means that if you fulfill both of these 2 conditions, you are obligated to pay a zakat. The first of these 2 conditions, remember, you have to fulfill both conditions in order to be zakatable. The first of these 2 conditions is bulugh an-nisab, reaching the threshold. And the second of these 2 conditions is madi al-hawl, a full lunar year must elapse. So you have 2 conditions: reaching the threshold and a full lunar year must elapse. Let's talk a little bit about the first of these 2 conditions, bulugh an-nisab. The nisab, or the threshold for gold, is 85 grams or 3 ounces. The nisab for silver is 595 grams or about 21 ounces. As for currency, it depends on 2 factors. Number 1, whether gold or silver is used as the base value of the currency. And number 2, the current price per gram or ounce of the precious metal, gold or silver, used for calculations or for calculating. So, for example, if gold is used as the base value, then we have to determine the nisab of the currency, the actual money that we have in the bank. We have to basically take the current price of gold per ounce, which is $1,722 US dollars. We multiply that times the nisab of gold, which is 3 ounces, and the result is 5,166 US dollars would be the used as the base value. Now, if we use silver as the base value, the amount of the nisab changes dramatically. Let's look at that. So we take the price of silver in US dollars per ounce, which is $15.59. And we multiply that times the nisab of silver in ounces, which is about 21 ounces. And that results in about 327 US dollars. So if you look at that, brothers and sisters, depending on the base value used for our currency, in one case, a person would have to have over $5,000 to reach a nisab, or to be considered zakatable. And in the other case, the person would have to have a little more than $300 to be considered zakatable. So now comes the obvious question: which of the 2 precious metals, gold or silver, should I use to determine if I'm zakatable, to determine to calculate my currency, to determine if I've reached the nisab? The scholars, may Allah have mercy upon them and preserve them, have offered some very good advice as it relates to this, and they basically said that it's always best to use the lesser of the 2 values. And in this case, that would be, in most cases, that would be silver. And they say this for 2 reasons. They say basically always use silver as your base value, or the lesser of the 2 in value as your base value. And they say this for 2 reasons. One reason is because it's ahwat. It is safer. that basically if you use the lesser of the two values, then you will pay. I'm sorry, how can I word this? If you use the lesser of the two values, then you will be required to pay more. And it's better to pay when you don't have to than to have to pay or not pay when you're actually supposed to pay. It's safer for you if you pay, right? If you put yourself in a situation where you're more often required to pay, and therefore you avoid being in situations where you have made a calculation that absolves you, but in the sight of Allah you're not absolved. So it's safer. Ahwat. The second reason why they say we should use the lesser of the two values is because it is ahaddu lil fuqara. It is ahaddu lil fuqara, which means it ensures that a greater amount of resources, it ensures, there I'm tripping over my words like I told you, it ensures a greater amount of resources are available for the needy. Why? Because if we use the lower threshold, more people will be required to pay a zakat, and therefore more people will be able to receive a zakat. And so therefore when we use the lower threshold, when we use silver, then what? When we use silver, then more people will pay a zakat, more people receive it, and then it becomes ahaddu lil fuqara. It becomes better for what? More resources are available for the needy. And I mention this because, as we alluded to yesterday, there are many people who, in their mind, you'd have to have thousands of dollars saved up in order to be zakatable. But in reality, if we look at it from the point of view of using silver as the base value, there are a lot of people who have $400, $500, $600 saved up, $700, $1,000 saved up, and they think to themselves, I don't have to pay zakat, I'm a poor man. I only have a few dollars, a few $100 saved up for, incidentals or, unforeseen circumstances. And in reality, that money is zakatable when silver is used. And so this is important for us to understand as well, that depending on depending on the precious metal used for calculating, a lot of people are required to pay zakat that in their mind may not think that they have to pay as zakat. All of that we just mentioned is related to the first condition, bulugh an-nisab, reaching the threshold. Let's now talk a little bit about the second condition for zakatability, which is madi al-hawl, the passing of one lunar year. What that means, brothers and sisters, is that at the time that a person's savings or supplemental wealth surpasses the nisab, and as we said, if we use gold, it's $5,166. If we use silver, it's a little bit more than $300. When a person's wealth passes that nisab, that threshold, the clock begins to tick. The clock begins ticking. And once one full year passes on that amount, and that person continues to possess that nisab, whatever it may be, $300, let's say, $330, let's say, if he continues to possess that amount or more than that amount, then he is required to pay zakat once 1 year passes on that amount or that nisab. He has to pay a zakat on whatever he has once a year passes. Now, in closing, there are a few important points to take note of. Tanbihat. We're going to mention 3 of them, inshallah ta'ala. The first one is we need to understand that the wealth that is subject to the rules of a zakat, everything that we just discussed, the wealth that is subject to the rules of zakat is saved or supplemental wealth, not earnings that are used for living expenses like rent and food and clothing and utilities and bills and debts, etc. Underscore this, brothers and sisters, zakat is not determined by what you earn, but rather what remains in your possession after these and other expenditures. So I'll give you an example. Let's say, for example, we have a guy's name is Zaid. And Zaid is, let's say he works as a physical therapist and makes about $7,000 a month. Now, some people would look at that $7,000 and say, certainly Zaid has to pay zakat. $7,000, that's a good salary. He makes good money and certainly has to pay a zakat. But Zaid has a large family. And he also has extended family back home that he has to support from his wages or from his earnings. So after he spends on himself and his immediate family, and his extended family sends money back to his extended family back home, Zayd has very little money left for himself. Money that doesn't reach that $300 threshold at the end of a year. Very little savings under the $300 threshold. Then Zayd, although his salary looks like it's significant, is not required to pay a zakat. Why? Because it's not based upon what he earns, it's based upon what he's able to save. The second important note is that each time a person's saved supplemental wealth dips below the nisab, the clock stops ticking. The clock on what we call madhi al-hawl, it stops ticking. And when it rises to the nisab, the clock will begin ticking again. So how do we determine madhi al-hawl, the passing or elapsing of a lunar year? It has to pass on the entire nisab for the whole year. If the amount that's saved dips beneath the nisab, and then the clock will stop. And when it rises to the nisab, the clock will begin ticking again towards what? Towards 1 year. Let me give you an example. Let's take Zayd again. Let's say that Zayd, at the beginning of the year, let's say Muharram, he receives an income tax return, $7,000. Immediately, once he has $7,000 that he's basically going to save for himself, doesn't have any expenditures that he's going to spend out from that money, then the clock will begin what? Will begin ticking. And it keeps ticking and ticking toward what? Toward the next Muharram. If the next Muharram were to come and Zayd still had that $7,000 or whatever amount was above the nisab, he would have to what? He'd have to pay a zakat. Let's suppose in the month of Rajab, a few months after he received the income tax, he had a problem in his roof. And he had to get basically get the roof replaced. And that exhausted the entire $7,000. He goes back to zero and the clock stops ticking. At the end of the year, let's say in Dhul Qa'dah, he receives a bonus from the company that he works for. And that bonus is in the amount of $5,000, let's say $5,500. So he's clearly above the nisab. The clock will begin ticking again now once he receives that money from Dhul Qa'dah, which means that the year begins calculating from what? From Dhul Qa'dah, not from Muharram when he had the $7,000 income tax return that he spent out on the roof repair. The last tanbih is once the year is complete, the zakatable wealth is determined by what at the time, not at the time when the clock started. This is important. And I'll give an example to clarify. But basically what we're saying here is that once the clock starts, the person may continue to what? To amass more savings. We don't look at what he had at the time when the clock started. We look at what he has at the time when the clock stops and the whole year has completely elapsed. Give you an example. Let's take Zayd again. In the beginning of Ramadan of any particular year, Zayd had a zero balance in his savings. Then by Nisfi Ramadan, at the middle of Ramadan, he got an income tax return, $7,000. So now Zayd has $7,000. He's clearly zakatable. And then in Muharram of the coming year, okay, which is before the completion of the complete lunar year, because the complete lunar year is going to come in Ramadan of that coming year. In Muharram, he receives a bonus, $5,000. So now the total now, at the time of Muharram, or the month of Muharram, he has $12,000 total. Ramadan comes, he still has that $12,000. Zayd has to pay zakat on $12,000, not on the $7,000 that he started with in the previous Ramadan. And with that, inshallah ta'ala, we have concluded our discussion on how do I determine if I'm required to pay a zakat. And inshallah ta'ala, in the coming lesson, we will talk about how to calculate your individual zakat. How to calculate your individual zakat. Until then, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless your night and to accept all of your prayers and all of your dua and all of your dhikr and your recitation of the Quran you'll be doing this evening, trying to catch Laylatul Qadr. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who will catch this night. فَغُفِرَ لَهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنبِهِ sins will be forgiven. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.